Welcome to the season after the Epiphany, the season of the let's get serious. It's the season following the spiritual and emotional high of Christmas and precedes Lent. In the life of the church, we are busy, normally, trying to prepare ourselves before the quiet and introspective season that leads us into Easter. Even in life outside the church, people are busy filling into gyms, participating in marathons, purchasing self-help books, and scheduling self-care and wellness-type activities before the rush and the busyness of the year takes over sometime by spring. As we ramp up in our lives, I pray that we would listen to what God might have to say to us during this season. We'll be spending our time in 1 Corinthians during this season after the Epiphany. Today, I want to begin with a short illustration. The early bird catches the worm is an idiom that is likely familiar to you, but I wonder if you have heard of this phrase before. The shot hits the bird, which pokes its head out. And you're probably familiar with another phrase, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. But do you know this Japanese proverb? The nail that sticks out gets hammered. There are idioms from different cultures that are somewhat oppositional. I'm sure you can think of a few by yourself. Hopefully you can see how difference of culture can influence how we relate to one another. What might be understood as diligence in one culture may be thought of as arrogance in another. A demeanor offered as respect for the group may be interpreted as a submissive individual. It goes to show how important it is that those who make up a single community have the capacity to understand each other. Such was the point of Paul. Paul writes to the church in Corinth for many reasons. Primary among them was to address disunity within the church. And it's helpful to understand the context of the church in Corinth. The city of Corinth was a major hub. As a city located near the connecting points to two bodies of water and two land masses, well, Corinth could do nothing but succeed as a city. Established early in Greek history, serving as the provincial capital of Greece under Roman rule at the time that Paul was writing, the city was filled with deep culture, diversity, and wealth. Its influence would grow up until mid-4th century when a large earthquake practically leveled the city. It was a city that attracted a lot of people, and along with them, disputes of all kinds. Greeks and Jews, in particular, were on opposing ends of the Christian faith. A bit ironic when you consider that both were conquered by the Romans. You would think that their similar pains would have cause for empathy for one another. But instead of this commonality, they disputed over what kind of Christian practice and doctrine was better. And despite over 2,000 years of progress and development of the Christian faith since then, we seem to be no less divided and disjointed in the church today. Paul's letter can certainly make the case as a relevant topic even in our time. So, how does Paul address this unity? Well, in our reading, he uses a verbal formula. Aisi dairesis de autas. In English, it translates, there are varieties, but the same. Variety of gifts, of services, and of activities, but the same Spirit, the same Lord, and the same God who activates us. We are gifted in our variety of ways, Paul argues, so that we can be united by the Spirit and join together to work for transformation of ourselves, of our community, and the world. There are a few areas that I think must be addressed in understanding this passage for us. First, you don't want to confuse your gift with your spirituality. Sometimes we make the mistake that our ability to do a thing and our faithfulness as Christ's disciples are the same. If we see the practice of or the exercising of our gift as the mode of our faith, then we will have difficulty in living out our faith when they are not tasked with our gift. There may be no doubt that we excel in a function, yet to correlate our faithfulness to a task or function means that we will fail to respond faithfully when we are being called for another reason, another purpose. Worse, if we insist that we must be able to exercise our gift, we may very well prevent others from participating, causing stumbling blocks for others. Let us remember that the giftedness of the Spirit is not for showcasing, and certainly the giftedness of the Spirit is not bound to one's ability to do a thing. If that were the case, then what would we say to those who were born with different abilities, or for those whose abilities were taken from them due to life circumstances? Would they be considered absent of gifts? Not at all. If you need evidence that God is not looking for performance, I'd ask that you look no further than James and John, two of Jesus' disciples and part of the inner circle, the three disciples closest to Jesus. They were found asking Jesus to be seated on the left and right hand. They wanted to be acknowledged for their performance, but Jesus wasn't going to have it. That isn't what God is looking for. Our giftedness should transpire what we do. It is not based on a function or performance. The second area of concern is that there are those who believe that they are not gifted in anything. We should admit that it's difficult for one to consider their gift, our gift, when we are placed in a hyper-competitive environment like the one that we live in, which is rooted in ableism or performance. Perhaps our ability to see ourselves is hindered by how others are portraying themselves. In comparison, we don't feel like we have a gift. But the fact remains, that isn't the kind of environment we are talking about when we say the kingdom of God. We all have something to offer in response to God, even if it's something that we have not yet learned to articulate. I know from experience, as it is for those of us from Eastern cultures, we're not taught and brought up to take notice, let alone take ownership over one's gift or talents. I mean, it took me ages for me to consider that I might have a gift in public speaking. It's difficult to say out loud even now. Let us realign our perspective, therefore, so that we pay more attention to who God is saying we are and not what this world is saying we are. Sure enough, I believe when you do this, when you listen to who God is calling you to be, then God can lead you to new realities. Contrary to what you might think, what we might think, God doesn't need our worldly gifts, but rather, God desires our faithfulness and obedience. It's just that our faithfulness and obedience normally causes one to discover new areas of spiritual giftedness. Back in the late 90s, our family had moved back to Korea. I was a high school student, and this was during the season where in Korea, everyone was going nuts about learning English. I think it had something to do with the post-Olympics. The 1988 Olympics had opened the nation's perspective and acceptance of Western thought. Anyway, it was such a rave that at Vacation Bible School, they created an English Bible story corner. Similar to our way of doing VBS, students would pass from one station to another to focus on a topic, right? So from music station to craft station to memory verse, so on and so forth. And one of these stations was an English Bible story corner. Now, these stations, they were managed by a team, usually a pair, if not more, of teachers, adult volunteers. But blame it on our recent move. They made my sister and I the team teachers for this station. I was a junior high school student and my sister a high school student. We were at most 3 or 4 years older than the eldest of the students. We were in no position to lead, and yet because we were from America, they made us lead in this. Now, my sister was always a bit more thoughtful, and she created the program, like deciding what story we would tell and how we would design the setting. It was kind of like a monologue. And because she took that role, I was voluntold to share the story. Did I want to do it? No. I had tremendous stage fright. Did I want to help? Well, yes, because it was for the church. Quite frankly, did I have a choice in the matter? No, my dad was the pastor and I was the pastor's kid, and you did what you were told. So here I was speaking to about 100 elementary students, a dozen at a time, telling stories about Moses, David and Goliath, Jonah and Daniel. Just happens that it was well received, so much so that we did it again the following summer for VBS, and also created a separate English-only camp, an entire camp spoken in English. Did I want to do that? No. Did I want to help? Yes. And again, I didn't really have a choice at the time. Fast forward 4 years, I'm in college at the U of A, I know. And at the time, the education director of the Korean church I was attending came to ask if I would tell Bible stories to the children. The children some were biracial, all of them spoke English only. And since I had been learning the guitar for the college Bible study group, wouldn't I open with a few praise songs? Well, I had experience in this actually, so I did. I volunteered, and I did that for 2 years. Fast forward again, and now I'm a college graduate running my own tech repair company, or at least trying to. And behold, I'm asked by the senior pastor to join in a pastoral internship so that I could lead the summer youth program. It led me to Claremont School of Theology because they had the Center for Pan-Asian American Ministries, and that's where I met the director who encouraged me to apply to CST instead of attending ILIF. You can work out the rest, but the arc of the story is to say, God calls us not always to use the gifts that we are aware of. If all we have is a faithful response and a yearning to join in, God can work for the good of those who love Him, for those who are called according to His purpose. Again, our understanding of the gifts of the Spirit is not about performance of or our ability to do a thing, but our faithful response. Now, I'm not one who believes that the list of the gifts here in 1 Corinthians 12 are exhaustive. In fact, I think Paul is speaking to the spiritual gifts in a variety of ways, that they are like gifts, some are like services, some others like activities we participate in. The point is not doing one of these things that Paul is noting. The point is that all of these are working together for God, working together. That's the most important lesson, isn't it? It's stood true through the test of time. If working solo was the direction in establishing God's kingdom, then God not only could have, but God should have had a single person throughout our history to embody Christ. A singular human being that could continuously point others to God. But that is not what happened. The exact opposite did. After Jesus rose again from the dead, He sent out the 12 through the Holy Spirit to do the work. And the 12 worked together to find even more disciples and to send them out also. And just as the Christian movement was building up momentum, God made sure that it would not be an elite group of folks or an individual by bringing in someone completely other. Paul, a Pharisee who was persecuting Christians, who then turned to be an apostle. It was clearly just so that we might know that the expansion of God's kingdom on earth was not somehow all anchored on Peter or John or even the 12 disciples. The church as we know it has always been and will always continue to be established by those working together as a response to faith. Thinking about tomorrow, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, I think about all that he did. He was certainly a man that was endowed with remarkable gifts, gifts for speaking and writing, gifts for prophetic leadership. But what's really astounding among all that he shared, and perhaps why we celebrate tomorrow as MLK Day, is that he enabled us, all of us, to work together, working together across racial and cultural lines so that we, as a whole, might see one another, not merely as individuals stacked up against each other, but as the same human being. And I quote, "And an individual has not started living until he can rise above the narrow confines of his individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity." I pray that we would be joined together in our response to God's love for us and God's call to us. And I pray that we would celebrate the many and varied ways God has equipped each of us for service. And I pray that each of you would be open and eager to be stirred up by the Spirit to join along. Not so that all of us are alike and not so that all of us are doing the same thing, but all of us serving the same God who activates each of us. May it be so. Amen.